I am glad to see you all again in this room, and those who are online, thank you so much. And our second presenter this afternoon is Teresa Vaughan from New Zealand. Her research is titled New Issues, Same Mercy Values, Applying Mercy Values to Today's Issues. Teresa works for the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet and has a background in science and public service. She explores how mercy values can be applied to modern global challenges such as landmines and nuclear weapons, which these two issues disproportionately affect vulnerable communities. Teresa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayet. Tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon to all of you joining us here in the House of Mercy. And good evening and good morning to those of you joining us online. A big thank you for coming to listen to our presentations today. We're almost there, just 2 to go. As Mayet mentioned, my name is Teresa and I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I'm hoping that through my project I can show you that mercy values applies to modern issues that didn't exist in Catherine's time. So, why did I come up with this idea? We're coming close to the 200th anniversary of the founding of the House of Mercy, where we're standing today. And as we've seen in some of the presentations, sadly, a lot of the issues we're facing today are the same. Education, poverty, gender-based violence, and homelessness all continue to be an issue today as they were in Catherine's time. However, sadly, we're also facing other issues that would have been unimaginable for the women who set up this house. Technology advances have dramatically improved the standard of living for some, but not all, and they've also introduced new problems. Military advances have created weapons that have impacts on civilian populations as well as combatants. For example, nuclear weapons have significant impacts far beyond the battlefield, with vast destructive capabilities and a significant environmental legacy. So too do landmines impact civilians long after the conflicts in which they were laid are over. Despite how removed these issues are from the initial focus of the Sisters of Mercy, mercy values can be applied to them. Mercy values do not just call on us to feed the hungry and welcome the stranger, but to take steps to protect our common home, not just to protect God's creation, but to ensure that there is food to feed the hungry and clean water to give the thirsty. So why arms control of all the issues we're facing today? Because these issues disproportionately impact the poor and vulnerable and often trap people in poverty. Landmines have injured and killed civilians and children in Cambodia, Syria, and Afghanistan, some of the poorest countries in the world. Also, nuclear weapons have been responsible for health issues and the displacement of Indigenous people in the countries in which they were tested. For example, in the Marshall Islands in Australia. These are the same people that Catherine set out to help. While her ministry worked more directly with the poor, her example calls on us to address the wider systematic issues that are holding people back from living their full potential. Now, mercy values have been articulated in a number of ways. The articulation I have here is taken from the Sisters of Mercy from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and as such, they have the values in Te Reo Māori first, which is the Indigenous language in New Zealand. Now, I know in this room I don't need to go through each of these values in detail, but just looking at them, you can see how they might be applied to arms control. A superficial look at them shows that arms control issues hit on compassion, respect, social justice, and concern for the poor and vulnerable. Now, for the rest of my presentation, I'm going to focus on 2 weapon systems, nuclear weapons and landmines. I will outline what they are, what their impacts are, and how mercy values can be applied to them. So nuclear weapons were first developed in World War II, and they're one of the most destructive weapons ever created. They use reactions of the nucleus in an atom to get their vast destructive capability. To give you an idea of how much larger their destructive capability is to conventional weapons, the energy release when a nuclear weapon is used is measured in thousands of tons of TNT. So that is, the energy that is released is equivalent to if you exploded thousands of tons of TNT. Now, when they are used, they have three main effects. There's the initial explosive impact, then the radiation that is released in the reaction, and sometimes they also have fallout. So exposure to the radiation results in long-term health impacts for the people who are exposed nearby and environmental contamination. And when fallout is formed within a nuclear reaction, it creates radioactive particles that can be carried on the wind and contaminate land far away from where the bomb is dropped. This can poison water supplies, soil, and air, and the effect can last for decades, causing long-term health issues, environmental degradation, and economic disruption. This map here shows you the countries that have nuclear weapons. In total, currently 9 countries have over 12,000 nuclear weapons. But if you look closely, you can see that the United States and Russia have the vast majority of the nuclear weapons, with over 5,000 nuclear weapons each. Now, you may think to yourself, this is a large number of weapons when each weapon has the potential to completely flatten a city. However, this is actually a decrease from the height of the Cold War, when there were approximately 70,000 nuclear weapons in existence. And this decrease was a result of arms control efforts between Russia and the US, which can show you what can be achieved when there is the political will to do so. So while much is known about the impacts and much has been made of the impacts of when nuclear weapons are used, less is often said about the impacts of manufacture and testing. So when you manufacture a nuclear weapon, it costs a large amount of money. Last year, it was estimated that global spending on nuclear weapons was over $91 billion. It also creates large volumes of waste, some of which that will stay reactive and a threat to health and the environment for thousands of years. For example, to just make one uranium weapon, of which the type that was dropped on Japan in World War II, you create 2,000 metric tons of uranium mining waste, and that is just in the mining set. That does not take into account the enrichment steps or the chemical reactions that are required to turn the uranium into the form that you need for a weapon. Now, as I mentioned, when countries develop nuclear weapons, they often test them, and there have been over 2,000 tests carried out while developing nuclear weapons. This has a significant impact on those living nearby and a huge impact on the environment. So if we go back to this slide, I can point out where the different countries tested their nuclear weapons. So the comment I'd make here is that they often tested them far away from their own land and in colonies or territories that they were in charge of. So for example, the United States tested their nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands. The UK tested their nuclear weapons in Australia and Kiribati in the Pacific. France tested their nuclear weapons in French Polynesia, and Russia tested, or the Soviet Union as it was then, tested their nuclear weapons in what is now modern-day Kazakhstan. I point this out because it's important to note that when the testing was carried out, the local people who were impacted were unable to hold their governments to account. And some of these impacts continue to these days. As I mentioned, the land was contaminated during the tests, and for a lot of these people, they still cannot return to their lands because it is unsafe. While there have been clean-up attempts, they have not been fully successful. So for example, in the Marshall Islands, people were forcibly removed from 3 atolls to enable the United States to carry out their testing regime. However, to this day, they still cannot return home because their land is still contaminated. This has led to generational poverty because these people used to live off the land and fish in the lagoon. However, now they do not have land that they can cultivate, and they do not have clean waters from which they can fish. It has also meant that they have lost some of their cultural heritage. the traditional customs and skills that used to be handed down from generation to generation. The impacts of nuclear testing are distinctly unjust. It impacts vulnerable people, and the after effects have kept these people poor and vulnerable. The people impacted were not the people who chose to pursue nuclear weapons. Nor were they the ones involved in the geopolitical competition that spurred the nuclear arms race. However, they were the ones who had to face the consequences. Yeah. Luckily, once the impacts of testing became widely known, there was an international movement to ban nuclear testing, which resulted in the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Now, while this treaty hasn't come into force due to a number of nuclear weapon states refusing to sign and ratify it, it has created an important global norm against nuclear testing, which is held. In parallel to the efforts to ban nuclear testing, there have been efforts to limit the risks associated with nuclear weapons. This is manifested first as an effort to stop the spread of nuclear weapons to new countries, also known as non-proliferation, and then moved on into an attempt to ban nuclear weapons themselves and have the countries who possess them give them up, also known as disarmament. So the first treaty that came out of these efforts was the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which came into force in 1970. And it is the centrepiece of global efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, while also letting other countries benefit from the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. This next treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, is a later addition to the range of treaties addressing nuclear weapons. It only entered into force in 2021. This treaty came out of an effort centred on promoting greater awareness and understanding of the humanitarian impacts and consequences that result from the use of nuclear weapons. A large part of this progress was due to the advocacy of non-governmental organisations, including the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. I would note that as of today, no nuclear weapon states have signed it, likely because this treaty would require them to give up their nuclear weapons. It also obliges countries who sign it to provide assistance to all victims of the use and testing of nuclear weapons, even if the country itself did not cause the harm, and to take measures for the remediation of contaminated environments. Currently, countries who are signatories of this treaty are negotiating how they can implement these obligations. Now, moving on to landmines. Anti-personnel landmines are indiscriminate weapons designed to injure or kill people in close proximity to them. They are laid during a conflict but remain a threat long after such conflict is over. Landmines do not just cost life and limbs, but they also prevent communities from accessing land that could be used to build schools or hospitals, as well as accessing essential services such as food, water, humanitarian aid, and humanitarian aid. Nobody knows how many mines are in the ground, but the actual number is less important than the impact. The mere suggestion of there being landmines present can render a patch of land unusable, in which case this is how they make it harder for countries to recover after a conflict. And in 2023, there were over 5,700 casualties from landmines and explosive remnants of war, with over 70% of these civilians, with over 1,000 children impacted. Okay, we seem to have lost a slide. Okay. So, this is the point at which the other MELF fellows will point out that these topics are quite hard going and a little bit depressing. So to counteract that today, I'd like to highlight some of the success stories in this space. And firstly, I'd like to highlight my favourite success story, which is the international campaign to ban landmines, which resulted in the Mine Ban Treaty. Now, this campaign has a special Mercy connection, as a number of sisters were heavily involved in the campaign, and then an extra special MELF connection, as all of the MELF fellows were able to visit Sister Denise and the staff at Meta Karuna in Cambodia and hear from them firsthand about their involvement in the campaign, and to sit and learn from them in one of the rooms in their facility, which is actually named the landmine room, in which the walls are covered from photos from the campaign. This campaign was a grassroots campaign involving non-governmental organisations. These organisations came face to face with the impacts that landmines were having on their communities and decided to do something about it. They centred survivors' stories and advocated for banning landmines due to the humanitarian impacts. And their campaign was so successful and managed to build such political pressure that within 5 years, the international community came together to negotiate a treaty banning them. And now the Mine Ban Treaty forms an integral part of international humanitarian law. Now, because of the special link to MELF, I also wanted to highlight the success that has happened in Cambodia. Back in the 90s, when the campaign was working to ban landmines, Cambodia would record approximately 20,000 casualties a year from landmines. And in just last year, it's down to 49, which is an incredible effort. Additionally, I'd like to highlight the success that has happened in Afghanistan, because it used to be reported that landmines had killed or maimed more people in Afghanistan than anywhere else. Additionally, it is quite a challenging operating environment for NGOs, as there is a complex political situation. But despite this, since the Mine Ban Treaty came into force, more than 18 million landmines have been removed from Afghanistan. So given all of this success, why am I talking to you about this? Well, unfortunately, because in the last 5 years, we have a resurgence in the importance placed on these indiscriminate weapons. This is because there has been an increase in the geostrategic competition between countries, leading to many countries feeling threatened and that they have to rely once again on these weapons. So this has led to an increase in the prominence of nuclear weapons in countries' defence doctrines and an increase in spending. So I've already mentioned that the global spending on nuclear weapons is estimated to be over $91 billion, equivalent to over $170,000 per minute. Between 2019 and 2023, global spending has risen by 34%. A cumulative $387 billion has been spent in these 5 years to maintain and build nuclear weapons. Despite the known costs, financial, humanitarian, and environmental, countries are continuing to rely and retain these weapons, and some of them are investing in expanding their arsenals and modernising them. On the landmine side of things, it is over 25 years since the Mine Ban Treaty came into force, and sadly, it is facing unprecedented challenges. Landmines have been used extensively in Ukraine by Russia, leading to the UN estimating that Ukraine is now the most mined country in the world. In response, the US has provided Ukraine with landmines. It should be noted that Ukraine is a state party to the Mine Ban Treaty and thus has agreed to never use them. Additionally, other countries that border Russia have stated they wish to be ready to use landmines to protect their borders should they need to. That means that Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Finland, and Ukraine have all stated that they're either planning to withdraw from the Mine Ban Treaty or have withdrawn. In 2025, countries are once again looking to these indiscriminate weapons to provide security when they feel threatened. However, in the increasingly tense geopolitical environments, they are forgetting the humanitarian impacts of these weapons. Now more than ever, we need to remind them of this, elevate the discussion and centre it on people and the humanitarian impacts of using these weapons. When these weapons were first used, the full extent of the damage they would do was unknown. Now we know. To continue to make these weapons, store them in large quantities, and use them is to disregard the inherent value of human life. These weapons do not discriminate between victims. The devastating impact on both human life and the environment is unjust. Mercy calls for us to care for our neighbour, especially the vulnerable, and to care for our common home. We do have some power at the structural and interpersonal level, especially when we work together. It is up to us to advocate for people as Catherine would have done, to advocate for and empower people in these countries affected by the consequences of war. This is how we can respect and restore the dignity of each and every person. So what can we do? International issues can often feel overwhelming and intractable, but the success of the international campaign to ban landmines shows us how, when people work together, they can have a real impact on the global stage. So here are just a few actions that individuals can take. The first is to contact your elected officials and to make sure that they know that these issues are important to you. We have seen time and time again that public pressure is often the best way to build political will in these issues. Even if your country is a country that is adhering to these treaties, it can be important to remind your politicians that these remain issues that you care about, so we do not see the backsliding that we've seen in other countries. Additionally, you can find an organisation working on arms control issues in your countries and join their efforts. Both the website of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons and the International Campaign to Ban Landmines have useful pages on their websites that show all of their partner organisations around the world and link to those partner organisations' websites and what they are doing. So you can have a look and see if you want to get involved. And finally, you can stay informed. Often, just knowing what is going on and engaging with the news cycle and others around you can be a powerful catalyst for change. And finally, I would just like to thank you all for listening. I'd like to thank the MELF team for everything that they have done to make this last year such an amazing year. I'd like to thank the other MELF Fellows for being such amazing, inspiring women on this journey together. And I'd like to thank my family and friends and my mentor back in New Zealand for all the support you've given me in the last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Yes, nuclear weapons and landmines have long-term effects on people and the environment. It's sad. It is sad to note about it. And instead of looking into the decreasing number of issues along this line, we see resurgence. And again, it's sad. However, Teresa says, we can do something about this if we work together. So that is why you are here. We are the seeds of that group, Teresa. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I think we have questions from online.
We
Go, Angela.
Thank you. Sister Denise Fox says, thank you, Teresa, for your powerful challenge to the systemic issues that cause the displacement of peoples and the destruction of our common home. The facts and figures you have presented are alarming. Can you talk more about how Mercy people can be effective in these two areas of landmines and nuclear weapons?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Sister Denise. What I would say is that Mercy Sisters have already been effective in these areas, and so can continue to do so, and we can continue to build on the amazing work that they have done. So I would particularly highlight again the work of Sister Denise in Cambodia, just because we had such an amazing experience with her and how she was able to work with the people around her who had been impacted by the landmines and bring their stories to the global stage and get action. Something that we've been quoting a lot that Sister Denise said to us when we asked her how did she manage this was that it's about meeting the other person and hearing their story. So that's how they centered their campaign on survivors' stories, and that once they, had the survivors encounter the people who were in the places of power, they were able to really make change there. So I think it's again about centering things on encountering other people and the people who have been impacted and basically getting the stories out there.
And thank you. I've got another message from Sister Anna Nichols saying, Thank you, Teresa, for a very interesting and challenging presentation, and for reminding us that issues such as landmines may be banned, but that security concerns and war may cause countries to revoke their support for such treaties, and that we must continue to keep a focus on these issues. Hilda Cruz, former fellow, says, Teresa, I appreciate your research and connections of the landmines, nuclear weapons, and how they generate local poverty. I had no idea that the US had over 5,000 nuclear weapons. Thank you for reminding us that nuclear threat is still out there and we must advocate to abolish nuclear weapons and ban all landmines and weapons of destruction, landmines, and weapons of mass destruction. And Sister Kathleen Rushton says, thank you, Teresa, for your research and the challenge you pose for us all to work together for transformation and change.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, anyone from the audience? Yes, Lucia, then McKenna.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for that inspiring advocacy on landmines and nuclear weapons. I'm Lucia from Nairobi, Kenya. From the report, it is sad to see 1,400 children being affected by landmines innocently. My question is, how can Mercy care for these innocent children hurt by landmines?
Thank you for the question, Lucia. I guess it's the way that Mercy has always cared for vulnerable children. It is to, wrap around support services, make sure that they get educated. Some of the wonderful work that we saw in Cambodia was that Sister Denise and her team had set up workshops where people could learn crafts, and then they were able to then build beautiful things that could be sold. So a number of the fellows left with beautifully hand-carved wooden symbols, and in that way they can, learn these skills and become financially independent as they grow up. But one of the big things that I would be excited for is to make sure these children don't get in that situation in the first place. It seems crazy that in 2025 we still have children being maimed by landmines that most likely weren't even laid this century,
Hi, Teresa. McKenna from the US. First off, I am so proud of you. And coming from the United States, this is such a heartbreaking presentation, and I'm really grateful that you've done it. I come from a place where militarization is kind of apparent everywhere. It's in our movies, it's in our media. Recently, when the US gave landmines to Ukraine, the US spent weeks saying, but they're the good landmines because they shut off after 7 days. My question for you is, what would you want Americans to hear to be able to take back and to say, that's not enough?
Thanks, McKenna. That's a really great question. One of the things I would say, when the US gave Ukraine the landmines, I had that same argument with a friend of mine who said that Ukraine is in an existential fight and that we must do everything to support them. And to that I would respond with, what is the point of having values if you only stick to them in peacetime and when things are easy? The fact is that the landmines cause indiscriminate harm to whoever's around. And it's also been shown that even though they say they're supposed to shut off after 7 days, we don't know that 100% of the time they do. And so in terms of the practical impacts on the use of land, they would have similar impacts to the old-fashioned landmines that we don't know whether they actually successfully turn off after that time. So irrespective of the fact that they're the safer landmines, they're still not safe and they're still inhumane. Thank you for the question, though. Great question.
Tēnā koe, Charlotte from the South Island of New Zealand.
Kia ora.
I'd love to understand when we're writing to politicians and telling them that this issue is important to us, especially in countries where we're on the right side of these issues, what do we want our politicians to do? What are we asking of them?
That's a fantastic question. So, as Charlotte has highlighted, sometimes you can be in a privileged position coming from New Zealand because we are a big advocates for the Land Mine Ban Treaty, and we're also a big advocate for the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. So it can feel like, as a New Zealander, well, I don't need to do anything. What I would suggest is we want to encourage our diplomats to reach out to other countries who don't see these issues the same as us, and to continue to talk to them, to continue to engage and to outline our positions and continue to sort of hold out that hand to them so that we don't become divided, but can still have those really important discussions where we might be able to capture their hearts. And depending on what's going on in the public sphere in their own countries, we could manage to, get them to come along on the journey with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. You've challenged us to really apply mercy values in these two big issues, which sometimes people do not want to talk about this. So thank you for that challenge, and I hope that we can go for that challenge, and some years we could see other numbers or statistics, lower statistics. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.